Some stories, they walk through the door and you can smell the desperation from 100 feet away. This wasn't one of those. This one came in smelling like gasoline, just waiting for a spark. The file landed on my desk with a thud, and the title alone told me we were in for a long day. My family thinks I'm out of control with my rage. You see a title like that, and you immediately picture someone who's just a walking, talking powder keg. And the tapes they sent in? Well, they didn't disappoint if you were looking for fireworks. We saw a young woman, let's call her Chloe, maybe 22, screaming language that would make a sailor blush. We saw a laptop thrown against a wall, shattering into 100 pieces. We saw her mother cowering and her father stone-faced and withdrawn, just shutting down completely. The labels came fast and thick from the family's letters. Monster, psychopath, a ticking time bomb. They painted a picture of a daughter who was terrorizing their home, holding them emotionally hostage with her unpredictable explosions. And on the surface, based on that video evidence, you'd be hard-pressed to argue with them. The behavior was extreme, it was destructive, it was, without a doubt, out of control. But in my line of work, you learn very quickly that behavior is just the symptom. It's the smoke, not the fire. My job isn't to put out the smoke. It's to find the fire and see if we can get to the source before the whole house burns down. When I first sat down with Chloe in the pre-interview, I wasn't met with the raging monster from the tapes. I was met by a young woman with her arms crossed so tight she was practically hugging herself, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for the nearest exit. Her anger was there, sure, simmering right under the surface like a pot about to boil over. But underneath that anger, I saw something else. I saw fear. It was the fear of a cornered animal. The world, and especially her family, had slapped a label on her, and she decided to wear it like a suit of armor. If they were going to call her a monster, then by God, she was going to be the biggest, loudest monster they'd ever seen. I started simple. So they tell me, "You've got a bit of a temper." She just glared at me, a silent challenge. I didn't flinch. Look, I've seen the tapes. It's not pretty. But what I haven't seen, what I haven't heard, is your side of it. The title of this show is Your Words. So tell me, what's your side of the story? That's when the dam began to crack, just a little. The story that came out wasn't one of a mindless rageaholic. It was a story of feeling invisible. She said, "They don't listen. They never listen. Not unless I'm screaming. It's like I don't even exist until I break something. Then, all of a sudden, everyone's paying attention." And right there, that was it. That was the key. Her rage wasn't just chaos. It was a tool. A horribly dysfunctional, destructive tool, but a tool nonetheless. It was her desperate, misguided attempt to be heard, to be seen, to matter in a family system that had, in her mind, rendered her completely powerless. The problem with a tool like that is that it eventually becomes your identity. You swing a hammer long enough, and you start to see every problem as a nail. Chloe had been swinging this hammer of rage for so long, she'd forgotten she had any other tools in her belt. The family saw the destruction, the broken laptop, the slammed doors. They didn't see the frightened little girl inside who was just screaming into the void, "Can anybody hear me? Does anyone even care that I'm here?" My job, as I saw it, was to get past the screaming and talk to the girl who was hiding behind it. But to do that, we had to get the whole family in a room and turn the lights on. Not just on Chloe, but on the entire dysfunctional dance they had been doing for years. This wasn't just Chloe's problem. This was a family system in full-blown crisis. And she was the designated patient, the one carrying all the symptoms for everyone else. The fire wasn't just in her, it was in the foundation of the house itself. When we brought them all out on stage, the dynamic was exactly what I expected. Chloe sat on one end of the couch, rigid, coiled like a spring. Her mother, Susan, sat in the middle, physically leaning away from Chloe and towards her husband, Mark. She was trying to create a buffer zone, but all it did was make her look like she was choosing a side. And Mark sat there like he was carved out of granite. He had this look on his face, a mixture of stoicism and sheer exasperation, as if this whole thing was a colossal waste of his time. The air between them was so thick with unspoken resentment, you could have cut it with a knife. I let them sit in that silence for a moment. Sometimes what isn't said is more telling than what is. The audience could feel it. I could feel it. You could see the entire family system laid bare in their posture, in the inches of space between them. Mark, I began turning to the father. I've seen the video of the laptop. I've heard the screaming. Tell me, from your point of view, what's going on in your house? He sighed, a deep, heavy sound. I don't know, Dr. Phil. 1 minute things are fine. The next, she's like a different person. We walk on eggshells. Anything can set her off. It's impossible. We work hard. We provide for her, give her everything she needs. And this is the thanks we get. Constant drama, constant anger, everything she needs. I repeated. Define needs for me. He looked at me, a little confused. A roof over her head, food, a car. We paid for her college. Okay, I said. Those are things. You provided things. Let's talk about something else. When Chloe was, say, 10 years old, and she came home from school upset because some kids were mean to her, what happened? He blinked. The question seemed to throw him. He looked over at his wife, a silent plea for help. Susan jumped in immediately. Well, we'd tell her to be strong, to not let them get to her. You know, sticks and stones. So you told her how to feel, I clarified. Instead of asking her how she felt, we were trying to help, Susan said defensively. We didn't want her to be a victim. But what she heard, I said, turning my gaze back to Chloe, who was now staring at her hands in her lap, was probably, your feelings are wrong, toughen up. Don't bother us with this. Am I getting warm, Chloe? A single, sharp nod. She didn't look up. This is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. The fire doesn't start with a thrown laptop. It starts with 1,000 tiny sparks over 2 decades. It starts with a father who is emotionally absent. Mark wasn't a bad man. He was a product of his own upbringing. I'd bet my last dollar his own father was the same way. You work, you provide, you don't complain, and you certainly don't talk about feelings. Feelings are messy. Feelings are for women. His currency was providing, and when his provision wasn't met with gratitude, he saw it as a personal failure and a sign of disrespect, which he met with cold, stony silence. That silence wasn't neutral, it was a weapon. It was a withdrawal of love, a form of punishment. And Susan, in her role as the peacemaker, became the enabler. Her primary job, as she saw it, was to manage Mark's moods, to keep the peace. So if Chloe came in with a big, messy emotion, sadness, fear, frustration, it was a threat to the peace. It might upset Mark. So Susan's first instinct wasn't to comfort her daughter, it was to quiet her daughter. Shh, not now. Don't be so dramatic. Calm down. She was so busy managing her husband's emotional state that she completely invalidated her daughter's. Over time, Chloe learned a powerful, toxic lesson. My quiet feelings are an inconvenience. My sad feelings are a burden. My frustrated feelings are a problem. But my rage gets a reaction. My rage makes everyone stop and look. It's the only feeling big enough to break through the wall of her father's silence and her mother's placating. I laid this out for them. Mark, you're a classic stonewaller. When things get emotional, you shut down, you retreat. It's a defense mechanism, but your daughter experiences it as abandonment. Susan, you're the classic peacekeeper. You're so afraid of conflict that you'll sacrifice authentic emotion to maintain a false sense of calm. You've inadvertently taught Chloe that the only way to get your undivided attention is to create a 5-alarm fire. You have together created the very monster you now condemn. The denial was immediate. That's not true, Susan said, her voice trembling. We love our daughter. I have no doubt that you love her, I said, my voice calm but firm. But love is not enough. You can love someone all the way into the ground. What she needed was to be heard. She needed you to be curious about her feelings, not just critical of her behavior. The behavior is just the language of an unmet need. I looked straight at Susan. I hear you say you love her, but let me ask you a question. If I'm dying of thirst in the desert and you love me, do you bring me a sandwich? No. You bring me a glass of water. Love isn't about giving people what you think they should have. It's about figuring out what they truly need and trying to provide it. Chloe didn't need a car as much as she needed a conversation. She didn't need you to pay for college as much as she needed you to be interested in her passions. You guys were bringing her sandwiches when she was dying for a glass of water. This is where things started to heat up on stage. You could see the defensive walls go right back up. Mark leaned forward for the first time, his jaw tight. That's ridiculous. We supported her. We paid for that graphic design course she wanted to take, thousands of dollars. 6 weeks in, she drops it, just throws the money away. And when I tried to talk to her about it, to talk about responsibility, that's when the laptop went flying. How is that us not listening? Okay, let's stop right there, I said, holding up a hand. This is a perfect example. Let's rewind the tape on that incident. Chloe, you tell me first, why did you drop the class? Chloe took a shaky breath. Because it was awful. The teacher was a hack, and it wasn't what they advertised. It wasn't teaching me anything I couldn't learn from a $5 book. It felt like a scam. I tried to tell them, I came home one night and I said, Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you about this class. I think I made a mistake. And what happened? I prompted, Mom said, oh, Chloe, not tonight. Your father's had a long day. And Dad just kept watching TV. He didn't even look at me. He just said, you started it, you'll finish it. We're not wasting that money. That was it. Conversation over. They didn't ask me why. They didn't ask what was wrong with it. It was just about the money and me being a problem again. I turned back to Mark. Is that accurate? He shifted in his seat, more or less. The point is, you don't just quit things because they're hard. Did you hear her say it was hard? I asked. Or did you hear her say it was a waste of time and not what she signed up for? Because those are two very different things. One is about character, the other is about judgment. You jumped straight to judging her character. You made it about her being a quitter instead of being curious about her experience. The look on his face told me the truth. He hadn't considered it for a second. In his black and white world, you finish what you start. The nuances didn't matter. The context was irrelevant. His role was to pay the bill. Her role was to be grateful and complete the task. When she deviated, it wasn't a problem to be solved. It was an act of defiance to be quashed. This is the escalation. It's never one big thing. It's this. 1,000 of these little paper cuts of invalidation. She tried to use her words. She came to them calmly. She was met with dismissal, so her brain conditioned by years of this dynamic, went to the only tool it knew would get a result. If the quiet voice doesn't work, get the megaphone. If the megaphone doesn't work, break something. So after they shut you down, I said to Chloe, you went to your room and stewed on it for a few days. And the resentment built up. And the next time your dad brought up the wasted money, you absolutely lost your mind. Am I right? Yes, she whispered. He cornered me in the kitchen and started lecturing me about fiscal responsibility like I'm a child. And all I could think was, you weren't interested in talking 3 days ago when I needed you, but now you want to lecture me? I saw red. I couldn't take it anymore. The laptop was on the counter and I threw it. And there it is, I said, looking back and forth between the three of them. The cycle complete. Chloe, you tried to communicate, you were ignored. You bottled it up until you exploded. Mark, your refusal to engage with the initial, smaller emotion created the space for a much bigger, more destructive one to grow. You watered the seed of her rage with your silence. And Susan, I said, turning to her, you stood by and let it happen because your fear of that small initial conflict was so great that you were willing to risk this massive, catastrophic one. You're all co-conspirators in this. Chloe is the one who lit the match, but you two handed it to her and soaked the room in gasoline. This wasn't Chloe's rage problem. This was a family's communication bankruptcy. The blame shifting started immediately. So it's our fault? Mark said, his voice rising. She's an adult. She's responsible for her own actions. She is 100% responsible for her behavior. I agreed, looking him dead in the eye. Throwing a laptop is not okay, period. But you are 100% responsible for your contribution to the dynamic that led to it. This isn't about blame. Blame is a useless, dead-end street. This is about acknowledging the role you play in this toxic dance. Because if you don't acknowledge your steps, you can't ever learn a new dance. That's the point where you either get a breakthrough or a walkout. When you hold up a mirror that clear, that unflattering, people have a choice. They can look at their reflection and acknowledge what they see, or they can smash the mirror and blame you for showing it to them. For a long moment, Mark just stared at me, his jaw clenched. I could see the internal battle raging. Part of him wanted to stand up, call me a quack, and storm off the stage. His whole identity was built on being the provider, the stoic rock, the one who was right. Admitting his silence was a form of emotional abandonment. That was a threat to the very core of who he thought he was. I didn't let him off the hook. I kept my gaze steady and my voice even. Mark, let me ask you about your father. When you were a kid and you were upset, what did he do? He hesitated, then gave a short, bitter laugh. My father? He'd tell me to go cut the grass. Go do something useful, he'd say. Stop your belly aching. So he never sat down with you and said, son, talk to me, what's wrong? Never. Not once. And here you are, I said, leaning forward, doing the exact same thing to your daughter. You're telling her to stop her belly aching and go do something useful. The only difference is you're doing it with silence instead of words. You are parenting her the way you were parented. You're passing down a legacy of emotional neglect from one generation to the next, and you see the result. It didn't work for you, and it sure as hell isn't working for her. Is this the legacy you want to leave? That was the shot that hit home. You could see it in his eyes. The anger started to deflate, replaced by something else. A flicker of pain, of recognition. For the first time, this wasn't just about his out-of-control daughter. It was about his own history, his own unhealed wounds. I turned to Chloe. It was time for the confrontation she'd been waiting for, but not the one she was expecting. I wasn't there to yell at her. I was there to disarm her. Chloe, I said, my voice softer now. Your anger has served a purpose. It's been your bodyguard. It's been your megaphone. It has kept people at a distance so they can't hurt or disappoint you, and it's forced them to pay attention when you felt invisible. It's worked for you. But look at the price. Look at the wreckage. A broken laptop, a terrified mother, a father who has no idea how to reach you. You've won the battle, but you're losing the war. The war is for connection. The war is for intimacy. And your anger, your rage, is the single biggest thing standing in your way. You are so busy being the monster, you've forgotten how to be the girl. Tears started to well up in her eyes. She fought them, biting her lip, but they came anyway. These weren't tears of rage. They were tears of grief. Grief for the connection she never had. The greatest power you have is not in throwing things, I continued. It's in your voice. But you have to learn to use it differently. You have to be willing to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to say, Dad, when you walk away from me when I'm upset, it makes me feel like I don't matter to you. Instead of screaming and calling him an asshole, you have to say, Mom, when you tell me to calm down instead of just listening, it makes me feel like my feelings are a burden. You have to trade the sledgehammer of rage for the scalpel of honesty. It's a lot scarier, I know. It's easier to be angry than it is to be hurt. But anger is a secondary emotion. It's the scab you put over the wound. We need to get to the wound. This was the core of it, the moment of truth. I looked at all three of them. The pattern in this family is broken. It has to stop. It starts with you, Mark, learning to sit in the discomfort of emotion without shutting down. It starts with you, Susan, learning to validate your daughter's feelings instead of managing your husband's. And Chloe, it starts with you putting down the weapons and learning to use your words, even when you're afraid no one is listening. Because I'm telling you, if you change how you talk, you will change how they hear. I challenge them right there on the stage. I want you, Chloe, to look at your father, and I want you to tell him without screaming, without insults, what you needed from him in that moment in the kitchen before the laptop went flying. She took a deep, shuddering breath. Her eyes were red, her face was blotchy, but for the first time, she looked directly at her father. Her voice cracked. I just needed you to ask why. I just needed you to care about why I was unhappy with the class, not just about the money. I needed you to see me. The silence in the studio was absolute. Everyone was holding their breath. Mark looked at his daughter, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in years. The stone facade was gone. His eyes were glistening. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then finally managed to speak. His voice thick with an emotion I doubt he'd let himself feel in decades. I'm sorry, he said. Just 2 words. But they landed with the force of a thunderclap. I don't know how to do this stuff, Phil. I just don't know how. That, I said quietly, is the most honest and useful thing you've said all day. Because you can learn. That moment, right there, was the breakthrough. It wasn't the end of the road, not by a long shot. It was the beginning of a different road. Apologies are nice, but they're just words. The real work is in the changed behavior that follows. Still, that I'm sorry and I don't know how from Mark was everything. It was an admission of fallibility. It was a crack in the armor of stoicism he'd worn his entire adult life. For a man like Mark, admitting you don't know something, especially something emotional, is like admitting you can't read. It's a fundamental blow to his identity. But in that moment of vulnerability, he created an opening for his daughter to walk through. You saw Chloe's entire body language change. The tension in her shoulders eased. The defensive posture she'd held for the entire show just melted away. She wasn't the rage monster anymore. She was a daughter who had just heard her father speak a language he'd never used before. I turned to Susan. Susan, what did you just see happen here? Her eyes were wide, and she was dabbing them with a tissue. I've never heard him say that, ever. And what was your role in all this? I asked. In your effort to keep the peace, what did you prevent from happening? She thought about it for a second, the wheels turning. I guess I stopped this from happening. I was so afraid of them fighting, of Mark getting angry and shutting down, that I never let Chloe get her feelings out in the first place. I was the gatekeeper, and I kept the gate closed. You were the pressure release valve that was rusted shut, I said. The pressure was going to build up one way or another. By trying to avoid the small, manageable expressions of frustration, you guaranteed a massive explosion later on. Your job isn't to be a referee. Your job is to be a parent. And sometimes that means letting your kids and your spouse have the hard, messy conversations. This is the part of the process people don't always understand. You can't just fix the problem, child. You have to re-engineer the entire system. It's like a mobile hanging over a crib. If you touch one piece, all the other pieces shift and move. You can't just adjust Chloe's behavior and expect everything else to stay the same. You have to adjust Mark's stonewalling and Susan's enabling. When they change their steps in the dance, Chloe is free to change hers. We spent the rest of the show laying out a very specific plan for Mark. The homework was simple, but incredibly hard for him. He had to practice being curious. When Chloe came to him with a problem, his first and only job was to ask questions. Why do you feel that way? What happened to make you think that? Tell me more about it. No fixing, no judging, no lecturing, just listening. His currency had to shift from providing things to providing presence. For Susan, her task was to stop being the go-between. She had to learn to tolerate the discomfort of conflict between her husband and daughter. When Chloe came to her, instead of running interference, she had to say, that sounds like something you need to talk to your father about. She had to stop absorbing everyone's emotions and start letting them handle their own relationships. Her new role was facilitator, not firefighter. And for Chloe, the biggest challenge of all, she had to commit to using her words first, last, and always. She had to give up the intoxicating power of rage. We talked about a rage tax. Every time she felt that anger rising, she had to ask herself, what is the tax on this? What will this explosion cost me in terms of trust, connection, and self-respect? We gave her tools for de-escalation. Walking away, writing it down, counting to 100, whatever it took to create a gap between the trigger and the reaction. In that gap, she could make a different choice. She had to learn to trust that her quiet voice was enough. I told them, this is going to feel awkward. It's going to feel like you're all speaking a foreign language. You are going to screw it up. Mark, you're going to start to lecture. Susan, you're going to try and jump in and fix it. Chloe, you're going to feel that urge to scream. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is to catch yourselves and try again. The goal is to say, wait, that's the old way. Let's try the new way. We sent them home with a referral to a family therapist in their hometown, someone who could help them practice this new language week after week. Because an hour on my stage isn't a magic cure. It's a diagnosis and a prescription. They still have to go to the pharmacy, get the medicine, and take it every single day. The outcome for a family like this is never a neat little bow at the end of the story. It's not like they went home and never had another argument. That's not realistic. The goal isn't to eliminate conflict, it's to change how you do conflict. It's to fight in a way that brings you closer together, not blows you further apart. I followed up with them a few months later. That's a part of the job that's crucial. You don't just put people on television for a dramatic hour and then cast them back into the wind. You have a responsibility to see it through, to offer the resources for real change. The phone call was illuminating. It was Susan who answered, and her voice sounded different. Lighter, less strained. It's not perfect. Dr. Phil, she said right off the bat, we're not some perfect family now, but it's quieter. The house is quieter. For them, quiet was a victory. The absence of screaming, of slamming doors, was a sign of progress. She told me about an incident that had happened a few weeks prior. Chloe had gotten a flat tire and had been late for something important. The old Chloe, Susan said, would have come home in a whirlwind of rage, cursing the car, the world, anyone who got in her way. It would have ended in a screaming match about how it was probably their fault for not buying her better tires. But that's not what happened. Chloe came home, threw her keys on the counter with a frustrated sigh, and said, I've had the worst day imaginable. Susan said her first instinct, the old instinct, was to say, oh, honey, don't worry about it. It's just a tire. The classic invalidation. But she stopped herself. She remembered her homework, so instead she said, that sounds awful. Tell me what happened. And Chloe did. She talked for 10 minutes straight about the tire, about being late, about her frustration. She didn't yell, she didn't blame, she just vented. And when she was done, she looked at her mom and said, thanks for listening. Later that evening, Mark came home and Susan told him about the tire. His old instinct would have been to launch into a lecture about checking tire pressure, about proper car maintenance, but he stopped himself. He went to Chloe's room and knocked on the door. He didn't bring up the lecture. He just said, hey, your mom told me about the tire, tough break. We'll get it sorted out tomorrow. It seems so simple, doesn't it? A conversation that didn't turn into a fight. A moment of frustration that didn't escalate into rage. But for this family, it was like climbing Everest. Each one of them, in that small series of interactions, chose to do something different. They chose the new dance over the old one. Susan chose to listen instead of placate. Mark chose to offer support instead of a lecture. And because they made those choices, Chloe was able to stay in a place of frustration instead of escalating to destructive rage. She didn't need the rage because her primary need, the need to be heard and validated, was being met. That's the outcome. It's not a Hollywood ending where everyone is hugging and crying in the rain. It's real, it's messy, it's a series of small, conscious choices made every single day. The potential for the old patterns to reemerge is always there, lurking under the surface. It takes work, diligence, and a commitment from all three of them to stay on the new path. The rage wasn't the problem. The rage was the symptom of a family system that was starving for emotional oxygen. By opening the windows and letting some air in, by teaching them to communicate, to validate, to be curious, we didn't cure Chloe. We gave the whole family a way to breathe. Chloe's journey was about learning that her power wasn't in her volume, but in her vulnerability. Mark's was about discovering that true strength isn't in stoic silence, but in the courage to connect. And Susan's was about realizing that true peace isn't the absence of conflict, but the ability to navigate it with honesty and grace. This case stuck with me because it was such a textbook example of how a problem person is often just the designated symptom bearer for a problem system. They're the squeaky wheel that gets the grease, but the whole axle is misaligned. By focusing only on Chloe's anger, they were missing the point entirely. Her anger was a distress signal, A flare shot up from a sinking ship. You don't get mad at the flare, you look for the ship. Did Chloe completely overcome her anger issues? Probably not overnight. That's a long road. But did she learn she had other tools? Absolutely. Did the family learn that they had a collective responsibility to change the emotional climate of their home? I believe they did. And that right there is the beginning of a real, lasting change. It's the difference between just surviving together under one roof and actually starting to live together as a family. It's the quiet victory that's so much more meaningful than the loud explosions it replaced.